Hello, and welcome back to Dollars and Dragons. Today I have with me a repeat offender, a guest once again, Banana Chan, who, if you haven't heard on the podcast before, you can go back in the show notes. You'll see episode 38. I talked to Banana Chan a couple of years ago. And I want to welcome Banana Chan back to the podcast. If you'd like to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, just before we start talking.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I like repeat offender. It makes me sound so dangerous. Hi, everyone. I am Banana Chan. I am the owner and co-founder of a tabletop role-playing game company called Read Write Memory. Previously, we were Game and a Curry. I am an award-winning game designer. I am a screenwriter. And some of my notable work has been on Joshua Blunt the Banquet Hall, Revenant Society, Forgery, and Betrayal at House on the Hill 3rd edition, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and Chucky the board game. So, yeah, just a few things.
Chucky the board game. I was terrified of those movies growing up. What's your relationship with Chucky growing up?
My relationship with Chucky, I would say, is pretty good. We had a nice relationship. I wouldn't say that I was scared of Chucky. I was more scared of Gremlins, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what it is about the Gremlins that terrified me so much. It was like Gremlins and the aliens from Mars Attacks. Those terrified me.
Right. Those
Yeah,
guys.
yeah, like that terrified me. I grew up like watching the Ring movies and like the Grudge movies too, and like anything with like a guttural sound terrifies me so much.
Yeah. Personally, and this is something that I really like you about you as a designer. I can tell that you are 100% like a horror fan because of the depth at which you plumb to find weird shit to creep people out with. And let's with that being said, let's start with Knockoff. And this is gonna be your latest game, which is, by all accounts, like I'm looking at the PDF, it looks pretty done. Like it looks
Thank
pretty done. Like
you.
it's
Yeah.
nearly done. I don't know how much work you actually have planned on it, but if you go to back it, it looks like it's gonna ship pretty soon. Not This is not a legally binding promise from Dollars and Dragons.
Yeah, yeah,
But
please. I don't know how long it's going to take given the state of the world being on fire.
right.
But yes, the manuscript is done. The text is all done. What's not necessarily final just yet is the fabric sample. So there's some fabrics that I need to switch in and out of. And I'll give a little bit of context as to why there's fabric in a bit. But yeah, we just have to switch out some fabrics, put it into layout, and the PDF will be ready. But yeah, we'll see how shipping goes with manufacturing and everything, given that it's 2025 currently.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of those things that actually worries me about small publishers, especially because even if you use something like Drive Through RPG, I don't know if you saw the news that their print on demands have just gone up,
Hmm.
um, because of the tariffs and whatever other weird shit that's going on with trade wars and stuff. But let's talk about Knockoff itself. And when I took a look at this, you were so gracious to send me a preview copy, and it really just it reminds me of a couple of things about this series, and I feel it's very Dorian Gray inspired in a lot of ways. For those of us not familiar with Dorian Gray, basically a guy paints a painting and it takes over his life, and it's like it keeps him alive and immortal, and it represents all of his evil in the painting as the painting like sort of molds. And I'm sure you've seen at some point at least a Batman cartoon which or some type of cartoon which displayed the story of Dorian Gray, because it's been reinterpreted and reimagined in so many ways. But I have to know, like, what inspired this, like, sort of this series overall, and then specifically Knockoff, because it feels like The Devil Wears Prada,
Yeah.
if it were a Dorian Gray novel.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. That's a saying, right? That's a saying. I'm going to say that that's a saying. Yeah. So the entire trilogy started, and for context, the trilogy is called the Mephistopheles trilogy, so it's very Faustian inspired, like you said, Dorian Gray. But starting with Forgery, which is the first game in the trilogy. It's about a disgruntled art forger who recreates a cursed painting. And, she's commissioned to do this thing, but it turns out that the painting is cursed and it gives her, all of her desires and dreams and all the successes that she wants, but at a cost of her friendships, her relationships, all of those things. And so the game started off sort of as just like this idea of wanting to explore something in my past, which is the art world. So I went to art school, and I used to go to gallery openings all the time. And at those gallery openings, you meet all kinds of people. And after graduation, I felt like it was hard for me to find a place in the art world because usually, if you come for money, then it's a little bit easier to start off your art career. I guess like most careers, most creative endeavors are
Right.
like that. But it was a little bit trickier for me to get started. And so, I found office jobs. I found like, whatever retail work here and there. And then now I'm here. But back then it was just like really hard for me to find a job. And so I was trying all these different things. But that was sort of what inspired forgery. Another thing that inspired forgery was one of my best friends. She's still a good friend of mine. Her name's Jenna. She painted this really gross, terrifying painting of a pale man with bleeding eyes and a bleeding mouth. And this thing was like this demon that's bald. And she had this painting in her room for a while. It creeped her out because she was living in New York. So it's like, you only have one room. And she's sleeping with this painting like facing her because she couldn't put it anywhere else. And so she made that thing for a charity gallery event, and no one bought it. And the gallery owner was just like, okay, what do you want to do with it? And she's just like, just throw it out, I don't care, like I don't want it in my apartment. And so apparently they threw it out, but someone years later tagged her on Instagram, of that picture. Like they took a picture of that painting and like tagged her in it. And she didn't know who the user was. The user like apparently just made this account and like only had one picture. It was just like that picture. And she was just like, this is really weird. I don't know what to do. So I was like, yeah, maybe we should just, I don't know, just ignore it and see what happens. And so that's what the game is inspired by as well. So that's forgery. And then knockoff is like the fashion version of that. So timeline of events, made forgery, started connecting with Carlos Cisco. We adapted forgery into a screenplay. Then I was like chatting with Carlos, like, we're going to do a trilogy, like, just so you know. And so planned out a trilogy, made knockoff, just drafted up sample, which is the third in the trilogy. And yeah, now we're here trying to fulfill it, or not trying to fulfill it, trying to crowdfund it.
For your style of like indie production, I'm very curious, and I want if you are okay revealing your secrets. I
Yeah.
wonder how do you start production on something like this, because it sounds like you started just with an idea and you said to yourself, wouldn't it be crazy if, and then blank, and then you just started going with that. But like, what is your creative process like that, going from just that spark to actually creating forgery and now knockoff?
Yeah, I think for knockoff it's a little bit easier because it started with forgery, and so I had that framework already. It's all sort of the same mechanics in that in forgery you're doing a paint by numbers, and dependent on the colors that you choose, that leads you down a specific path. For forgery, you're picking out specific fabrics, so different fabrics will determine the outcome of the story. Um, I also forgot to mention that knockoff is also about the main character working in a corporate office, and he works in fast fashion, and a lot of that is sort of inspired by my time working in an office as well. And so I think that and this is related to the production element, where it's like a lot of the stuff that I make is inspired by the things that I live through and the things that I see. And so yeah, it does start with an idea. The idea ends up on like a notepad somewhere. And typically what happens is because I had like, the template for forgery, I use that same template for knockoff. And adjusted a lot of the stuff that was in forgery for knockoff, changed the characters. Now we're following Marcos instead of Tempest. And what is Tempest what does Marcos life look like? And what does his day-to-day look like? And what are the things that motivate him, and what are the things that drive him as a character? Writing all of that down and just sort of like going through it line by line and making sure that, instead of Tempest, we're focusing on Marcos now. And so I think when it comes to the creative side of things, it's very much like, taking whatever I can, taking all the inspiration points and trying to mesh them into a first draft, right? So the first draft is typically the most fun for me. That's like the most fun I have. It's the editing that I have an issue with, because then it's just like, oh, I have to adjust this, I have to mess around with that, and puzzle piece things together. But sometimes it can also be like a really fun and rewarding process, depending on who I'm working with, right? So if someone's giving me feedback and they're giving me like really direct feedback, then it's easy for me to like see clearly, oh, okay, this is where I need to adjust things, or this is how I can make this better. Um, and from there, after a couple of drafts of, you know, getting through feedback from playtesters, getting through feedback from friends or consultants or other folks who might be involved with the project, then we go into the final version that then goes into editing, and then from editing it goes into layout. Um, and that's pretty much what the process looks like I mean, not every single time, but most times when it's like, with a solo journaling game, which is like a lot easier to finish than like a, something that's got more players. Uh, that's pretty much how the process looks.
I'm curious then, if we're talking about working from template, which I'm sure a lot of the designers listening to this really understand working with probably majority 5e, right? We all have that template. We have the SRD, we have the um I forget what it's called, but the style guide. We all have the style guide. We all have the guidance and the DMG. I'm curious about like when you are in this free form place where all you have is like the feeling and the motivation and like the inspiration for what this thing is. How long is that process for you to actually decide what type of game it is? Because you just started with like a raw idea, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that starting out knowing how many players it's for is also a good starting point, right? So, I knew that I wanted to do a solo journaling game, and I also knew that this was going to be from the perspective of one person, so one character, and a lot of this was going to be like a choose your own adventure type of game. And I think knowing that off the bat really helped with planning out the chapters and planning out like, the series of events. So in terms of like, what were next steps after figuring out like what exactly I wanted, I plotted out the chapters. And so listing off all the chapters, what's going to go into the beginning, what's going to go into like the it's not necessarily character creation, but more like getting to know the character section, and then leading into the, okay, you're going to find the demonic dress. You're going to find like the sketch of this dress at an estate sale. Now you're going to start cutting and pasting your fabrics. What does that look like? So that's sort of like the part where it gets into the choose your own adventure type of layout, where it's like, okay, like if you choose this, then this happens. You go to chapter whatever, and then eventually you lead back into the main chapter story. And so every chapter leads you down three different paths, but those three different paths will end up at one specific area, and that will just keep going until you get to the end. And your dress is going to look different if you go one way rather than another. And the story is also going to look a little bit different, but at the end of the day, you're still going to get to a full dress.
I am curious about, so you have some consultants listed in the text.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about how it is that you choose your consultants and what role they served in Knockoff specifically. And I know you work with consultants pretty often, it seems like. It seems like
Hmm.
you seek out collaborators that are subject matter experts, but let's talk about the Knockoff consultants and like how they played a part in this.
Yeah, so let's start with the fashion consultant. So I actually talked to Elise Resendez, who you might know her work from it's not Mythic Grove. What, is it Mythic Grove? Sorry.
Session zero, yeah. Session
Session
zero.
Zero. Is it
Yeah.
Mythic Is her company
Hmm.
Mythic Grove or is that okay?
Yep.
I totally why did I feel like I was messing it up with a different company? Yeah, she did Session Zero. And she actually previously worked at New York Fashion Week. And so we started chatting and I was sort of picking her brain on what was it like to be a part of New York Fashion Week behind the scenes because I've only seen New York Fashion Week as an attendee, and I'd never seen it, behind the scenes. I've never worked it, and so I needed to know like what was that like. And so chat with her. She gave me some really good insight, and it was really helpful just learning about like what does it look like with fast fashion? How do people get their prints if you're working for a fast fashion company? Usually, a lot of the prints or a lot of the designs that they have through fast fashion companies they scour through Etsy. So they scour through Etsy, they find like, stuff that people really enjoy, whatever is popular, and they steal it. Another place that they steal a lot of ideas from is actually the runway. So Prada, Gucci, whoever has a runway show at the time, they would have people go to those fashion shows, take as many pictures as possible, share them with, their office, and then they would like, recreate a cheaper version of that Prada dress or that Gucci dress or whatever. And so it was just like a really interesting behind the scenes look at like how did people do this? Like what did fast fashion companies do that made things like, first of all, it's like it's kind of weird because it's like, people work here, people work at these companies, and they're just regular people, but the companies themselves are just like kind of unhinged. Like the way that they work is like really unhinged. So that was really interesting. And then the other consultants I worked with were Lexi McQueen and Janaea Kemper. So Lexi McQueen helped me figure out the voice for Marcos because Marcos is a gay black man, and I don't have the same experiences that Marcos does, right? So even though in the story I do put in a lot of my own sort of family history into Marcos, like we both have weird relationships with our family members. We both have, emotionally abusive parents, that kind of thing. Like I put that into Marcos just because, it's a little bit of myself. And that's something that is very personal to me. And I like putting my own personal stuff into my work. But in terms of like actually having a voice that makes Marcos feel more real, feel less like me and more like Marcos, I needed some help. And so talked to Lexi. Lexi gave me some really good advice. They were incredible in trying to pinpoint like all of the areas that I needed help with. And so they were fantastic at like just trying to hone in on Marcos's voice. And then Janaea Kemper was Janaea and I are like really close friends. We've been friends for oh god, it's probably been like 10, let's say 10 years, just round it up. We've been friends for like 10 years, and she's an incredible like educator, LARP write, game designer. She, I think, recently won a Nebula Award too. And so, like, yeah, she's done a lot of stuff, and she and I were chatting, and she's also really into fashion. She gave me a whole lot of recommendations for reading, and she was going through the text and making sure that there were some things that had context for why Marcos would choose those decisions. So while Lexi sort of helped out with the voice, Janaea was sort of helping out with the whys behind Marcos's decisions. And so she gave me an extensive reading list. There were so many different books I like, got a chance to go through. One of them was Chiffon Trenches, or is it the Chiffon Trenches? I think it's the Chiffon Trenches. Let me just double check that real quick. Um, Yeah, The Chiffon Trenches, a memoir by Andre Leon Talley, that had a lot of gave me a lot of insight into like, what was it like working um, in the fashion world, specifically, from Tally's perspective, and some of that like sort of was used in Marcos's perspective as well. Um, there's, Dapper Dan, who had this great quote about knockoffs in general that sort of, it sort of was used for the title because it was just like, oh, this is such a good quote. But Dapper Dan was like one of those characters in New York that um, he was like not very well received in the fashion world, I felt like. And so the reason being is that he would take logos like Gucci logos or Prada logos or whatever and like remix them and like make them like basically make them his own. And only recently did he become like this big name where people are like, oh, like Dapper Dan, like, really cool designer. But it took years and years before he got to that point, and that the these designers, they didn't really have that recognition that they deserved, and a lot of it was because they were Black men working in the fashion industry. Like a lot of it was because they weren't really respected, or they just didn't have a platform or people advocating for them. And so I think that taking that perspective and like shaping Marcos's character that way was really helpful. So Janaea like helped so much when it came to giving me like reading lists and giving me like, people to look at, so that way I can sort of shape the character a little bit more into someone that feels human.
From my reading of it, and it really felt like the voice was very strong. The perspective that you've sort of, because it's a first person perspective, you're just taking on the role of Marcos. But I felt drawn in immediately, and I felt it really captured my attention, to where I actually had to take one of the suggested breaks that you put into the introduction section. I was just like, wow, this is making me really sad. I need to take a break. But yeah, it's fantastic, and I can see the work that you did with the consultants through the writing. I think the writing is very strong, and I think it's worth backing just for that. But I want to sort of segue into, what do you think the strengths of a journaling game to tell a story are, and creating that experience, and why you chose journaling for this series?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's two reasons. The first one is because I have been wanting to adapt it into a screenplay to start. So that was like my intention, right? Like write this game and follow along a character and then adapt it to a screenplay, because that's sort of like where my mind was at, where it's just like, I want to have a game, but I also want to have a screenplay. So that was like my selfish reason. My other reason is that I think that journaling is impactful because it's an introspective process, it's an introspective experience. And so I think when it comes to subject matter that is probably a little bit deeper, themes of jealousy, themes of wanting to be in a different place in your life and seeing everyone else achieve those things, but you're still sort of stuck behind. These are themes and feelings and thoughts that I think require that introspection. And so that's why I thought journaling would be like the perfect way to talk about these things.
That was such a good answer. I'm having a trouble with the follow-up question.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, I really no, I really feel as though you really nailed it. And this iteration, I don't want to say it's better than your previous book, because Forgery is still very good, but I feel like it has, you've gotten better at this type of game. I feel like it really has, um, taken up to like the, I don't, oh God, I'm about to say it, taking it up to the next level. But I feel as though it's like even stronger, and it's a very, I like it for a good number of reasons, but mostly that it's very different. And you exist in this realm as a game designer that I think is very free because, you know, you have a regular day job, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of these things that you do in game design are so outside of the norm that I do find it to be very interesting, like what you choose to spend your time on and like how you inject yourself into your work like an artist normally would, like a novelist would, like a musician would. Um, and I don't know if there's enough of that in the industry because there's like premier design like scene in tabletop. And maybe
Mhm.
I'm just not a part of it. Maybe I'm just not, maybe it's this collection of itch.io pages that I just haven't been on. But I feel like there just isn't enough interest in this sort of indie game where I feel like people would really enjoy it. And um, I don't know. What are your feelings about that? Because I feel like it's a little tired. Like everyone's just playing D&D. But like,
Mhm.
what would you say to someone who hasn't played a game like this, and why should they play it?
Yeah, I think so. For a little bit of context, I started designing games because of designers like Jason Morningstar and uh, Avery Alder. Like their designs are basically one of the reasons why I got into design. And it's because the stuff that they make isn't D&D. It's very different. It's very uh like I think people used to call it like free form, but yes, it's free form, but at the same time, it feels like it's something else. It lives in that middle ground between like art, like collaborative art, and tabletop role playing game. Um, and so I think that sort of guides my design choices a lot of the time where it's like okay like I see the way that they do things. I've played a lot of their games, we share experiences, and as a result I take that back and I design stuff that's kind of in the same vein or the same school if you will. um, and I think if anyone is still nervous about playing a tabletop role playing game, I would say like start there because a lot of the games that have been designed from Jason or Avery, like it's stuff that's it's very different and it deals with themes that are very relevant to um, I would say like to one's own self. Like you can sort of play it in a way that deals with genre in a different way. It's not necessarily like D&D where D&D is like very fantasy focused, right? Um, theirs are, it could be horror, it could be teenage drama, it could be something completely different. It could be a thriller, right? Like that kind of thing where they sort of try to make the medium of tabletop a lot more accessible in that the themes are different and also in the way that you're playing you don't have to learn like a billion rules, you can just like read it and just jump right in. So I would say that if anyone wants to play a tabletop role-playing game and they're still not sure about it and they don't want to read like a billion rules, then I would start in the indie space that they're sort of living in. um and in terms of design I would say that you know I personally would prefer not to design another 5e game just because I think that the form of a 5e game can only tell a certain type of story. And the type of story that I want to tell looks a little bit different. And so, as a result of a different type of story, it has to fit with a different kind of form. And so, that's just like the way that I'm designing. But if one day I was like, I want to design something that would fit perfectly for a 5e system, then I would do that instead. So, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's different tools. It's different. It's a different medium. I feel like this is sort of akin to like a boutique movie or like a Sundance movie or something like that. That's the vision of it is not only restricted by budget, but also it is restricted by being its focus is so narrow
Hmm.
that the constriction in some ways provides a lot of the charm of it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like it's one of those things that I would say to someone personally, like the difference between something like this and just like the newest module that comes out is that you're sort of like designing in some ways for 5e to fit a formula. And like you said, like in different words, but like a formula that gets you a particular result that people are familiar with and it's comfortable for them and like that's what they know and that's why they might be a little bit more resistant to trying something new. But something like knockoff and forgery, they are unique experiences that you want to tell other people about. And
Hmm.
that's how I would personally talk about it is like this was a creepy thing that I did where I put on some horror music and I got a little high and I read this and it got too intense and then I took a break. And that's like the type of experience that I have with a game like this. And I think that especially in our world where we're like so super connected to everyone and we're like bombarded by all this not only information but all this noise. Something that is as intimate as a story that is a journaling game has its place and I think can be really fun. And then also, when you finish the game, if you were to give it to somebody else or buy it for somebody else or something like that, then you can have that sort of relationship with them to talk about the cool thing that you found. And that is also really cool and something that you can't really do as much with like a D&D module, really. Unless you're running the game for them, of course, but you know.
Yeah,
But
that's a good point. Yeah. I was talking to someone else about this earlier where it's like the the artifacts that come out of the game also are just like a commemorative thing that you get, sort of like a little, I don't want to say trophy. I said this
it's
before.
it's such a creepy little abomination, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like your little baby. You got a little baby afterwards. Um, okay, maybe baby's not the right word for it either. But, you have your little creation, and I think that having artifacts, having creations after playing a game, is something that I really enjoy as well, just because it's like you did the thing. Yay.
Yeah. Um, shifting topics here. As a designer, I feel like and maybe this is just the perception, and maybe the perception doesn't match the reality, but I feel like you're very on task, right? You are a designer where I will just be like, once in a while, I'll check what Banana's doing, and then I'll see, oh, Banana just started this project. And then, like, 5 months later, Banana's launching the campaign or whatever. And then 5 months later, Banana has delivered that thing. So you're very on task for an indie person that has a full-time job and you're still releasing these games. My question to you now is, and this is as free form as you want it to be, and what advice do you have for designers who struggle with this aspect of the creative field, especially for those who are just starting out?
I feel like that was a very kind assessment, so thank you. Um, I think that it's really hard to make stuff. Like in general, it's really hard to make stuff. And I don't think it's just the act of making the thing that makes it hard. I think that everything else that happens in, anyone's life makes things hard, right? It's the say you have kids, like, it's the kids that you have to prioritize. It's your day job that you have to prioritize. It's the bills. It's the, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many things. And I think something that really helped me was to declutter a lot of the mental space that I needed to continue creating, because I think that we have we have an interesting space in tabletop role playing games where a lot of the folks that play together, they enjoy spending time with each other, and they make connections, but sometimes those connections might get a little bit messy. And so um, I'm just going to say it. I
Mhm.
think that I enjoy having few friends. I like having a close-knit group of friends and a close-knit group of people that I really trust. And then everyone that I work with or folks that I spend my working time with, they're sort of like acquaintances or the folks that I might, chat with if I think that we would have like a good working relationship with. Um, and I think that that's really helped my own mental clarity, just like trying to differentiate, you know, what do I need to get done? What is most important to me? And as a result of decluttering all of this, it's like, okay, I can free up time to not have to worry about whether or not my relationship with this person is still good. It doesn't matter. Like, what matters is the people that are closest to me, the work that I do, and that I can pay my bills on time.
Yeah. Yeah, wow, that was so grounding. I that is so wise, wise beyond your years, Banana. I, I am. I think I came about to that same conclusion in some ways, but I remember when I first started getting involved in the scene, like in 2021, and I was newly out queer, and I was trying to learn that, and I was trying to make queer friends because I live in a rural area, and it's difficult otherwise too. And I think it's been better for my mental health in some ways that I now have a regular job now because now I'm out there dealing with regular people and stuff, and then realizing that I can still have these, let's call them superficial work relationships, um, while still desiring like to have more intimate connections, but at the same time, like I've got fucking kids. I've got a lot of shit that I need to do in order to pay my bills. I still work 2.5 jobs. Like I work my full time. I do game design. I still run a few games. Well, just two right now, but that's still an extra 20 hours on top of
A
my 40
lot.
hour to 50 hour. Yeah, it's a lot. So it's like, and I totally hear you when you say that um, tabletop relationships and like other people like in the space where it's like some people pretend like it's a big community rather than an industry because it is an industry first. And a community is perhaps what you would have if you were just playing a game together. But um, that's not what you're doing if you're a professional in the space. You're in the industry. So to treat it as though you can be friends with everyone is just I'll be perfectly earnest with you. Like it's just the way I said that made it sound like I had an accent and I was saying honest, but I mean the word earnest for our listeners. Being nice in the industry has really just gotten me fucked over. It's like, and that's the reality of it. You're dealing with people. Sometimes you have good relationships, sometimes you have bad ones, and prioritizing those different things over just doing the work um, doesn't work out a lot of the time. And there's a lot of the industry is tough enough as it is. You got razor thin margins. Um, it's difficult. The attention game is more difficult than ever in this trying time in the year 2025. And there's so much on all of us to sort of make it under this oppressive system of capitalism. And cluttering your life with fake relationships doesn't help. It hurts.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's okay to put yourself first because you got to put on your own oxygen mask first before figuring out everything else. Like, if you have kids, making sure that your kids are doing okay, making sure that your partner's doing okay, or partners are doing okay. Like, there are all these things that compound when you have like all the stress, right? Like, it's already stressful enough that you have so much going on. And I think, if you still want to be creative and you still want to like do all this cool stuff, because that's what we're here to do, right? We want to be creative. We want to make stuff. We want to, um, make these connections through our art. Like, it takes a lot of time to sit down and think about like what's most important to us. Because I'm going to say this. I saw this on TikTok. I'm going to say like a little quote. At the end of the day, we only have 80 summers. And then we die. And it's like, what do you want to do during your time here? Like, what do you want to focus on? Because if it ends up being, you know, if I end up taking a lot of my time getting sucked into some something that I'm mad over, or something that happened to a friend of a friend of a friend that, ultimately does not impact me, then like that doesn't move the needle forward for my own happiness, and it doesn't make a change in anything really. Like it doesn't make things better for other people. So
I had that decision point for me last year, where I was working full time, and then I decided that unfortunately I couldn't like continue to live without healthcare. I was paying out of pocket for my healthcare, but there was no world that I would make so much money with my business that I was going to be able to afford $70,000 of surgery, right? And so I had to get a regular job, and that's what I did. And unfortunately, that meant that I had to close down all of my tables except for like one or two. And I had to start doing design part-time to the part-time that I'm already doing. And there are definite drawbacks to that, but I made that decision and I committed to it. So hopefully I'm on the right path, and by the end of the year I will be back aligned and like doing the thing that I need to do. I just knew that I needed to do a side quest, unfortunately, which is very inconvenient for all my projects. And because I still am working on 2 books that I need to deliver from crowdfunding campaigns. But like the fact of the matter is, like, I unfortunately, I hate to say, like, I had to prioritize my health. Sometimes people say that, but what they mean is just like they're prioritizing their health because they just did something horrible and they're like trying to disappear for a little while.
oh
But
no,
I'm
but
not doing that.
this is like you prioritizing like you though. Like
Right.
you
Yeah.
have to like live. Like you need the money to live, and you need to have healthcare. And you also have people who depend on you. You have children.
Banana, you're absolutely right. But it's just one of those things where it's like, I don't know. I guess I'm still detangling the hustle grind set from my brain in some ways, where I'm just like, I need to be doing all the things. I need to uh, be able to run. At one point, I was running 15 games a week. You know what I mean? Like
Oh my God.
I was, it's not
That's
great.
way too much.
I know it was. It took years off my life, but yeah, I was making good money doing that. It's just the fact that that was absolutely not sustainable. And that's like kind of what led to, because I did that moving into my crowdfunding campaign for Vineyard a couple of years ago, and I just fell apart after that. And I've just been trying to get myself to a healthy spot ever since then, because unfortunately with burnout, which is a very dangerous and common thing in this industry, because we all have regular jobs pretty much. um you don't know it's upon you until it's like too late and you're like 3 months
Mm,
into burnout.
yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel that. Oh shoot, I was gonna say something, I forgot. I just like lost it. Um,
you're probably going to talk about burnout.
uh,
Did I guess right? No.
oh shoot. No, I lost it. Nope, it's lost. It's gone. It's
Okay.
gone forever.
Fine. That's what happens when you're a boutique game designer. You have these unique thoughts that are just gone forever after.
We'll
But
figure it out.
yeah, yeah. Let me oh, that no, you're probably NDA'd for talking about your Chucky experience, but I was gonna ask about that. How is
Well, it's a fun experience. I thought it was great. Yeah, we could talk about the Chucky experience.
I'm kind of curious what it's like working for such an established IP that crosses mediums, and how that was slightly different from other things that you've worked on specifically. If you want to speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we could use two case studies. We'll call them case studies. So Chucky, the board game, is one, and then the other one is, we'll say, Betrayal at Mystery Mansion, Scooby Doo, because I think that that's probably going to be a little bit more interesting than regular Betrayal, because I also worked on Betrayal Third Edition, but Betrayal. Scooby Doo Betrayal specifically, that was two different IPs. So the first IP is Betrayal, and then the second one was Scooby. Now, for that game, because the game is already done, right? So it was like them telling me and the rest of Restoration Games, like, hey, we want to use this existing system and use Scooby as like the IP that it's going to be skin towards, I guess, like we could say it that way. But there weren't as many. It felt kind of both freeing and it felt a little bit freeing knowing the restrictions. And so the biggest restriction from the Warner Brothers side was that they had to give us a list of Scooby movies that we can watch and be, or Scooby movies and episodes that we could watch and be like, hey, you can use all this. So Where Are You was definitely one of those parts of the IP that we could use. And so I watched a whole bunch of episodes and we based our haunts around those episodes. And because we already had the framework of Betrayal, we could just use the same thing, right? We could just build those haunts based around what's existing. And so that was kind of freeing because we had so many restrictions and we were just like, okay, we know exactly what we're going to do, but we also know like we want to theme it in a fun way. So that was really fun. With Chucky, it was a little bit different because we didn't have a game. We had to design an entirely new system. We had to design an entirely new game. And so it was the three of us. It was me, Yansu Julian Kim, and Eric Slauson, and we were going back and forth doing a lot of brainstorming, doing a lot of testing, and trying to figure out like what would make the most sense. We watched all the movies and we were trying to figure out, and also a little bit of the TV show too, because there's a TV show. But we were trying to figure out like, what makes the most sense for Chucky, and we boiled it down to, well, we want to have the lore, we want to have like the different settings that are in Chucky, like the movies, but we also want to have something that feels like Chucky, right? So Chucky himself is a pretty weird character. He's like, we ended up with like Push Your Luck because he's kind of like this, I don't know, this character that does do a lot of weird things that test the boundaries of, would you do the thing if this was on the line? Like it was very much like a thought process of like, well, what makes the most sense? We were going to do hidden movement, but then another game was going to do hidden movement. I think it was like Halloween or some other game that was already under the Trick or Treat brand. So we were just like, why don't we do something a little bit different? We'll just do something that's like, might not make sense in the sense that it's like a slasher film, but makes sense for Chucky himself as a character. So that's sort of where we landed on. It was very silly. It's a very silly game. Like the movies are silly, right? Like all the movies are very silly. They're very campy, and so we wanted to have that campy flair to it. And yeah, overall, Chucky is just like such a queer, like it's such a queer IP. So it's what makes it fun because it's so campy, and we're just like, let's like make it like super, like let's make some moments like kind of like just out there. And so we were having a great time with it. I honestly thought it was a lot of fun. And so yeah, I feel like the character of knowing that we had like, the character to play with, like the IP to work with, it was like one thing, but then not having a system, not having like, any of that, it was both like very paralyzing and also like, well, why don't we just do what we think is best? And we just like ran with it. So yeah, it was like a moment where I was just like, what are we doing, guys? Like, what do we have to do? we eventually figured it out, but I think that that's like sort of the difference between the two, where it's like, you have a set system versus like you don't know really what you're going to be doing, and you sort of have to like figure it out along the way. Um, and both were fun. I would say that both experiences were a lot of fun. Um, but one was definitely more freeing than the other because there were those restrictions.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like restrictions do really help, and especially when you're first outlining a project, it's like it can feel like there's too much weight on you and too much freedom to really be able to creatively um, or be able to create, I should say, because you have too many directions to walk in. And I'm very interested in the fact that those IPs came to you with like, we don't know what type of game we'd like you to make. Is that kind of what happened? That's what it
That's what
feels like.
happened. It was just like
That's
so
crazy. Like
so
they just like
yeah.
whatever game you want to make,
Yeah.
like we trust you.
Yeah, with Chucky it
Oh,
was like that. Cuz like we were thinking like Child's Play. Like what is Child's Play? What is iconic about Child's Play? It's Chucky. Chucky's the thing, right? So, yeah, like it was yeah, they were just like, we want you to make a game, pitch us a game, and we were like, okay, here's the game.
right. Yeah, that's crazy. What a great opportunity. That's so cool. Have you played it with like your family or friends or like anything like that, or does it just sit on your shelf? I see it right there.
Oh god, yeah, it's like right there. It's
Yeah.
unopened. We've played, I mean, like I've play tested so many times, so it's
Okay.
like, okay,
Oh,
like,
okay, okay. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
gotcha.
like I I still would like to actually play it with like my partner or like,
Mm-hmm.
but Herb doesn't play games anymore, so I have to find someone else. I'll have to find
Oh,
like
right.
I'll have to find someone
Herb
who's
is gamed
actually
out?
into. He's pretty gamed out at this point. He's designing his own
Oh,
game right now.
oh yeah,
So I think he's more focused on that rather than like,
right.
yeah, trying to
He's
like
only
find more games to play.
Yeah, he's only got so many spoons. I saw that he was working with you on Knockoff, just random things that need to get done. It's always good to have someone like that on the team.
Yeah, yeah, he does production management. So basically he just like handles the communications um with us, like our company, Read Write Memory, and
Mhm.
the not publisher, sorry, the manufacturer. So we have a manufacturer overseas who we work with, and I don't know paper weights and stuff. Like
Yeah,
I I can
yeah,
barely tell the difference between like a matte finish and a satin finish. Okay, like I don't know any of that stuff. I mean, I can tell, but like Herb is the expert on that all that stuff, so he knows like, all of that because he used to work for a printer. And so he worked at a printer I think for like 10 years or more than that. And so he has a lot of experience like understanding like paperweights and like, uh all the finishes that we can have and UV coating and whatever, right? So he manages all of that stuff, and it makes my life a lot easier because I have no idea what I'm doing.
yeah. So in some ways, he's the COO. Then that sounds like COO type stuff, operations. Like he just knows.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's a CEO. I just make
yeah,
this stuff and then
yeah.
make him figure it out the rest.
No, that's good. It's always good to have people that are tactile and want to be involved in that. And I think um, part of the process in perhaps surviving in the indie scene is like finding a way that it fits into your life without taxing you too much, because ultimately it's always about creating the thing, but there are so many different things, challenges that get in the way of creating the thing and actually getting it out there, and like as far as publishing and manufacturing goes. So
Yeah,
whatever
for
you can
sure.
do to free yourself up to do those things, that's great. And we have
Yeah.
our Herb's your unsung hero. Well, I
Yeah.
guess not unsung anymore since we talked about him, but
Yeah, he handles all of that stuff. We actually just got a marketing manager. His name's Michael Loreno.
Okay.
Because I don't know anything about marketing either. I just like post on
Yeah.
social media and hope for the best.
Right.
And so he's been helping us out with that stuff. Like, we have graphic designers for a reason because
Right.
neither of us are good at it, nor do we have the time.
Hmm.
There's so many folks that we just like need to work with because we just don't we just don't have the time to learn another skill, or we just don't know how to do it, right? So
Yeah.
um yeah, it's been great working with like all these different people, especially like the illustrators that we've been working with, like Alex Ekman Lawn, basically a regular now at this point because he's working on all three covers. Robert Richburg is a friend from college, so we've known each other forever. And actually, I think it's been so. I was trying to figure out how long I've known my college friends now, and I think it's been 17 years.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, and so I've known Robert for 17 years, which is bonkers. But he did some of the cards for Jiangshi. He did the interior for some of the illustrations in Darkness of the Brick of Ohio. And now he's doing the chapter headers, or a few chapter headers for Knockoff.
Excellent. Excellent. I think this is a good point for us to wrap. Did you have anything that you wanted to talk about at the end of this episode that you wanted
Ooh.
to mention or shout out?
Yeah. I'll say that Knockoff is coming to Backer Kit in April. April 9th is when it gets released. And so it's a fun one-shot solo journaling game where you're playing a fast fashion designer who is trying to figure out his life, and he's trying to figure out like a just dress design to impress everyone at the fast fashion company that he works for. And he stumbles upon like an estate sale, and at the estate sale he finds a sketchbook, and in the sketchbook he finds a cursed dress design, and that is the cursed dress design that you are going to be creating using the fabrics that you are given in the book itself. And um the Kickstarter is, or sorry, did I say Kickstarter? I meant Backer Kit. Backer Kit is what I meant. The Backer Kit's gonna go for maybe 30 plus days. And then after that, we're just going to go ahead and put everything onto DriveThru RPG. Like the PDFs are going to be on DriveThru RPG, but then we're going to go straight to production once we are funded. So fingers crossed we get funded so that way we can go straight to production. And then hopefully nothing else in 2025 is going to be on fire so we can pay for these copies. We can pay for the games.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And the link should be already in the description of the podcast. You can check it out. You don't have to worry about what day it is. The day that this episode released, that is the day that you can go and back Knockoff. So you can do that right now, listener.
Hey,
Yeah. Thank you so much for stopping by, Banana. It's always a wonderful time talking to you. And yeah,
thank you so
I
much
guess
for
I'll
having me.